what we're doing in this paper is starting with a very general kind of account of public reason. And the point is that maybe a lot of people are using the same term, but not in quite the same way. So sort of to present it as a bit of an intro, but possibly reveal some points of disagreement in the process. Anyway, for the good of everyone here, the basic question we're starting with is, how can a social system be justifiable to all the different people within it? That's the question that's kind of guiding the talk here. And what we're doing is one sort of approach to trying to answer that. So to help grapple with this question a little bit, two things might be helpful. What sorts of reasons can be appealed to? And what sorts of things need justification? So in shorthand, sort of refer to this as the reasons question and the social ontology question. What sort of things in society could the public be interested in a justification for? And we're addressing this by creating a model, which is something nice and simple to use to get traction on this super complicated question of what's going on in society and how do we check whether there's a rationale for it that can make sense to everyone in the community. So this begins with some kind of a question, or it could be easier to think of it as some kind of a complaint or some kind of a concern. There's something in the community we're bothered about. We're wondering, do we have to go along with this? Why do we have this practice? Why don't we get rid of it? Lots of things I'm sure you can think of that we could sort of fit in here. I thought I'd let people create their own examples rather than have a stock one to run with until we get to the point of encountering specific problems. But some good ones are, any time there's a claim to authority, anytime someone tries to boss you around, tell you what to do. The fact that in our society we have great inequality, and some of the jobs or some of the roles that get the most money are also the highest status and not always the hardest. Is that fair? Is there a rationale for this, or is there some point at least to which it can be rationalized? We could think about the nature of a university, like what we have these institutions for, and therefore when they're failing and when they're not. All of these are sort of where the complaint might be, or there are plenty of other possibilities. So what reasons do we draw on when we're talking about, the whole public or the whole public affected? What reasons do we bring to bear to discuss this, to have the conversation? There's actually lots of options here. I've listed a few. Talk about human nature, what people need, what they want, their commitments and ideas, something like their political ideology, the stuff they say that they care about and that they affirm as their reasons explicitly. We could talk about what the actual truth is, because maybe that's, if we can really nail down that one, we can use that as a reason. And there's this little concept I've got here of social grammar, which is a sense that there are some things humans need to do to have a society and to get along with each other, but we might need to study that to appreciate it. There could be features of our society that are just kind of like the bones of our body that hold it together, and we don't, realize the importance of them until they're gone. There could be sort of some sense in which this social grammar is of importance to the justification, but not apparent immediately. So getting the question right, what is it that we're actually concerned with, is partly a dialogue back and forward between what kind of things could count as reasons and what do those reasons apply to. I'm wishing I'd put an example a little bit earlier in now, but we'll get to an example real soon. So what sort of things do people actually want a justification of? What is actually bothering them and that they need to stop and think, can we make sense of this practice? But also what sorts of ones can we even have the conversation about? So what makes something a good account of reasons? It could be something We want one that's sort of generally applicable because this is philosophy and we're doing very theoretical stuff. We're not sort of working one-on-one with an individual, but we're writing books that might hopefully be of use to a broad range of people. Reasons that are actually recognizable, like if we tell the public, hey, here's a reason for this institution, or here's a reason why this institution should be scrapped. The public might not get it at first, but they should have some ability to get it, with a bit of explaining. It should tap into something they actually kind of do care about and not something that the philosopher sort of wishes hopelessly that they might care about in generations' time. So the reasons should be independent, which just means there's something separate from the point at issue, so it's not completely question-begging and circular. And they should be sort of helpful in actually addressing the problem. So if we come up with an enormous list of different reasons, that's not actually going to be very helpful. It's not going to give us this nice, simple model I'm after. It could mean that we just can't make a choice. It could mean that it gives us too many options to choose from. We want to actually be able to do the academic work of making a model. So it's going to be this dialogue between the reasons and the social epistemology stuff. Can we explain one in terms of the other? It's going to be a bit of going back to the drawing board. This is how the sort of theoretical work plays out anyway. And I've got a couple of examples here. Like, I'm not making it up from scratch. A couple of examples of people doing this. Hobbes, how is hierarchy to be justified? How is it that some people can have claim power over others? And he's trying to shift the conversation in his world away from sort of moralized theology, the divine right of kings, when no one could agree on who had that divine right, towards the needs and fears, the very material and visceral stuff that people experience. He's writing in a civil war. Rules, what does a just society look like? And he conceives of it, and this isn't obvious to many people, it's going to be more obvious to some than others. He conceives of society as a scheme for mutual benefit. And putting on that kind of framework is going to affect what kind of reasons make sense in the discussion, and what it takes for those reasons to give us an answer to what society should look like. So the project is a bit like these, but it's trying for a very different sort of direction, for a different sort of point of comparison. So once again, looking for different sorts of reasons and looking for the reasons question and the social ontology question of what sorts of things need justification. In this particular project, what I wanted to try out, and what I advertised as the summer project, was using a psychotherapeutic model of reasons. So these earlier figures, they've got a few different accounts of reason. There's a few that are popular in the literature. There's stuff borrowed from the economists, the kind of Homo economicus model, the rational decision theory sort of model. There's more a fact-based account of reasons, getting all the propositions and conclusions lined up together so they work together. There's Kant's account of rational autonomy, which is a really ambitious account of reasons, and it's been very influential in this whole thing, sitting somewhere between Hobbes and Rawls there. I thought I wanted to try something different, something quite different for a different perspective. In terms of the social ontology, we won't sort of go into this side, what I thought might be helpful is the notion of a social role. So this is a sense of who I am and how I relate to others at a certain time. When I'm on campus, I tend to have the role of being a teacher here or something like that. And that dictates to an enormous extent what's appropriate behavior, what's expected of me, what I'm allowed to do and what I'm not allowed to do. When I'm not on campus, I might not be in that role. I might be in a very different one. I'm not going to explain all that one. That's a whole other presentation. But it was chosen because it nicely ties together lots of other things that other people have been looking at. Rawls's focus on the entire society, other people's focus on social norms. I think it ties together a lot of interests really well while being an important sort of topic. So why the psychotherapeutic model? Mostly just for a very different perspective. So just so used to talking about the economistic or the cognitivist ones, just something different seemed really good. I was hopeful that it would be good in diagnosing conflict. So if you've done classes with Julian and I, you've probably heard about prisoners' dilemmas and things like that. That's one diagnosis of what's going on in a conflict. I thought the psychotherapists or the mediators or some vague group of other people in a different part of the university would have a very different account that could be useful. So how they understand conflict, we don't even get to that today, but that was one of the objectives. And hopefully just generally, I thought they'd have some good things to say about what people value, particularly what values people can recognize themselves. And I've become more and more confident that they do, that this is actually like worthwhile. So what is the psychotherapeutic model? This was a big part of the summer project, was trying to put this together. It's really still work in progress. So we've been going through the literature and run it by a few people from counseling and psychology to see what they think, but still very work in progress. The basic idea is that psychotherapists are really interested in symptom reduction and promoting well-being. But to break this down into something more useful, we ended up with a 5-point sort of model. First, they care about autonomy. They expect people to care about autonomy. Autonomy is a really big part of this, again, this well-being and this avoiding symptoms, avoiding dysfunction. First one is autonomy. People have to recognize their reasons and values as their own, and they have to identify with these, have a sense of meaning. The idea of identifying with the values one's acting on, that's pretty cool from my perspective, because this is exactly what we want to talk about in public reason theory. This is like, this made me very optimistic for the project. And this is absolutely central to their project. The project of the psychotherapists is getting people to act autonomously and to feel that they're acting autonomously. Non-suffering is a bit of a no-brainer, that there's some kinds of suffering that people go to therapy for that they're trying to eliminate. But unpacking that could be really interesting. I'll do a little bit of that in a minute. Capabilities. I've called it capabilities because that's a familiar one to philosophers. They actually use terms like resilience more, but it sounds a lot like the capabilities approach in philosophy to me. In some political philosophy, some talk of justice. Obviously not identical, but it's hard to ignore the similarities. So they want people to develop their general ability to function in a wide range of contexts. Cognitive consistency. People are troubled, and this has a pretty long history back to at least the 50s in psychology, troubled when their beliefs and their actions don't line up, and the evidence in front of them doesn't all line up, and they're constantly seeking to resolve that in healthy ways or not. I've lost my voice a couple of times this week, so sorry if I'm trying to get through all the material, but also not lose my voice again. And finally, and this is the one we're probably going to focus on most of all today, or by far the most today, is intersubjectivity. Humans are collaboratively rational. We'll explain this in a minute. But it's a really part of their whole model of flourishing, of the reasons people recognize. of their account of human nature that, that guides how they deal with people in the profession. So all of these work together, right? We couldn't, fix someone's autonomy problems without addressing some of the others. But they're clearly kind of distinct values that it can't be sort of one, the rest can't be reduced to one of the others. A few interesting little things about this list. How culturally specific is the value of autonomy? In our culture, it's a really, really big part of what people want and of the practice of the psychotherapists. There are clearly some cultural differences, and people in Australia who deal with people from minority cultural groups actually experience that. They kind of have these cases where their practice has to change because there's no, the individual they're working with doesn't have much in their life that isn't known by others. They're seeking permission from, elders of the cultural group, or particularly husbands, if they're a woman. There are definitely cultures where autonomy is less pronounced, or our version of autonomy is less pronounced. So it's quite unclear how culturally specific autonomy is here, but certainly in the mainstream Western culture, it's a really big thing. Non-suffering, does that mean happiness is good, like the utilitarians say? And some of the papers said yes, the whole point of doing this is to make people happy. Some of the people we talked to really said hard no. It's not about happiness. Happiness is not the goal. So it's an interesting kind of contrast and disagreement there. What they all did agree on is, some kinds of suffering we want to prevent. Consistency, quite an interesting one for philosophers who might think, yeah, we know all about this. We know how to make things consistent with each other. That's our whole job, spotting logical inconsistencies and fixing them. I think there's a lot of digging to do there to see whether the accounts are actually talking to each other. And I can say straight off the bat, I think some philosophers are not at all talking about the same thing as the psychotherapists are. And finally, intersubjectivity, which is the one we're going to dig into and explain a bit. All these different accounts of psychotherapy, they really, they seem to be converging a bit, but they're very, very different. They're all talking about intersubjectivity. Are they talking about the same thing? We'll have a look at what's meant by this to dig into that a bit. So the topic now is just what do they mean by intersubjectivity? Because that's probably the most alien one to a lot of philosophers, or at least the ones that I'm used to writing for and dealing with and talking to, the ones who reviewed my thesis and things like that. So what comes under this label of intersubjectivity? Thinking in dialogue with others, developing our thoughts by discussing them and getting feedback. I was really happy to see this because this is what I've been telling students for years. Think of your essay as a dialogue. You've got to be engaging with a reader and trying to think what do they need to hear and looking at different points of view, having a back and forward between different points of view. So that was pretty cool that there's that seemingly some agreement there. Feeling understood and seen. Quite a different one, just having a sense that others are taking an interest in oneself and care and can relate. The social construction of meaning relates to dialogue to some extent. Just figuring out what one is thinking by talking it over with others and seeing where the agreement is and the disagreement. Not just figuring out like what's right and wrong, but figuring out what I actually believe, what I'm actually thinking. If I've got some vague sort of feeling, what is the feeling? So quite a big thing is the physiological response. And one of our counseling contacts was talking quite a bit about this, the feeling of being in the room with someone and sort of aligning with them in a physical sense. he said it's an important part of the whole therapy project is having that that relationship in the room with someone and identifying with the first person plural we, having a sense of we, not as an entity. Entity is not quite the right word, maybe it is. Having a sense that the project I'm involved in isn't just me, it's us kind of thing. I'm acting, well, we're acting as us. This experience of being in we mode is going to be a little bit of an alien sort of topic for the very individualist kind of philosopher. So we've got this model of reasons. Really central to it is intersubjectivity. And that relates, it's an important thing in its own right, an ability to have this intersubjective experience, but it relates to all the others like developing one's autonomy, avoiding suffering, developing one's capabilities, and whatever the fourth one was, that too, that's important. What's that? Yeah. Having that, getting one's thoughts right through the experience of interacting with others, resolving one's inconsistencies with others. So what are the consequences of this for what are important features of society? One thing we got thinking about is that the psychotherapeutic model seems to suggest that this other literature, the stuff I'm more familiar with, has been neglecting relationships quite a bit. Not entirely neglecting them, but really not looking at them in a very sort of three-dimensional way and not appreciating some really important things about them. So at that point, Mira suggested, let's look at the women's friendship literature. So I'll hand over.
I'll just use this microphone.
All right, whatever's. Okay? Yeah. Yep.
Is it on? Yes, it is. Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. So yeah, Michael was telling me about the psychotherapeutic model, and in typical Mira fashion, I was thinking about, well, how does this apply to my life? And I was thinking, well, I do a lot of my reasoning in relationships with other women. It's my female friends where I'm really getting into how I understand myself and how I understand the world. So I thought, why not look at that and see if there's anything useful there? So considering the psychotherapeutic model of reasons, we believe that looking at the friendship literature is possibly a really good way of developing a new model for reasons. And specifically, I noticed that the women's friendship literature ties a lot in with the autonomy component of reasoning, where people seem to not only develop their reasons through intersubjectivity, but they also have better self-understanding of their reasons. So they have more awareness and identification with the reasons that they have. So to demonstrate this, I'll discuss the functions of friendship that facilitate reasoning. I'll specifically be focusing on something called the holding environment and something called mirroring. And once I establish that, Michael and I will also talk about some socio-political ramifications of this model. So early on, we noticed that women are described as intersubjective reasoners, and that friendship between women are spaces where women are supported in developing, articulating, and understanding their reasons. Importantly, the dynamics articulated in the literature are not limited to only women. It's more that through some combination of biology and socialization, I'm kind of leaning more towards socialization, women are more able to and are kind of taught to have relationships that are more one-on-one and where you talk more about your feelings pretty much. So there's this kind of idea where the female friendship is face-to-face friendship and male friendship is side-by-side friendship. So, and obviously this is very general, but men will usually hang out and watch like the sports game together or play a footy together or something, right? While women hanging out, it's, wine and cheese night where you like have some wine and you have a chat. That's just kind of like the stereotypical way that the two genders seem to interact. And of course, there's exceptions and stuff, but that way of interacting is pretty well supported within the literature that I read. And there's lots of discussion about why that is the case, but it's not quite clear yet. So let me see. I'll talk about the first kind of aspect of friendship that helps with intersubjective reasoning, and it's something called the holding environment. So the holding environment in psychotherapy is where it's a space where clinical patients are actually able to engage with emotional and psychological reactions that might be uncomfortable. So therapists aim to develop this holding environment because it actually enhances the patient's ability to engage with self-discovery. In friendships, it's a bit different, but it's still kind of the same idea. When you're with your close friends, you feel a sense of comfort, familiarity, security, acceptance, and understanding, where the safety of the space allows you to be your authentic self. So pretty much, you have someone that you can kind of tell your secrets to, someone where they're not going to judge you if you say like something that you're not quite sure on, and that you're still like, I don't really know what I'm thinking about this, but yeah, help me out here, right? So that's, at least with my female friendships, that's what happens. I focus on this one lady's, it's called the therapeutic value of women's adult friendships. And it's an article based on a series of interviews that Dr. Joan Berzoff did with college-aged women in a university. So let me have a quick look. So she interviewed women who value their female friendships with the hope of creating a general understanding of how these friendships positively affect the interviewees' adult lives. And something that Dr. Berzoff realized is that they often reference this idea of safety and at-homeness, which enables them to be their true selves. So for instance, the first lady, Ina, she said she feels like a sense of total acceptance, a kind of totally laid back space to be yourself. Olga describes it as a feeling of comfort and relaxation, and a friendship as the ability to really be oneself and not put up a front with that person. The articulation of friendship as being a space of total acceptance and comfort and relaxation demonstrates that these women are engaging in that holding environment where they feel safe to be themselves. And it also demonstrates that that's something that they value about their friendships. Like there's something about female friendships that makes them feel safe. And then that's what they chose to talk about in this interview. To me, what seems to be important about these friendships is that by having the opportunity to be themselves, Olga and Ina are more comfortable with saying and doing what they really want to do. They are their authentic selves. This implies an ability to articulate their true reasons for their actions or beliefs or likes or dislikes. So this is more explicitly demonstrated with the statement from the interviewee, Helen. Helen says that her friendships remind her of the positive experience of being with a family in terms of talking to my best friend about personal feelings. Something new that is articulated in Helen's testimony is the actual process of intersubjective reasoning. She feels like she's with her family, implying a sense of safety, and this sense of safety is what then enables her to express her personal feelings or personal reasons. What I learned from these women and Berzoff's analysis of their interviews is that there needs to be an adequate holding environment or sense of safety that allows a person to disclose their thoughts and feelings. as intersubjective reasoning requires the sharing of reasons between at least two different people, the holding environment, therefore, it follows that the holding environment should engage with or enhance the ability to do intersubjective reasoning. I was trying to think of kind of a good model for this that everyone, even people who might not have the sense of friendship that I'm describing, can relate to. And I came across some literature on classroom environments. And this one article was saying that we can see the role of a safe environment in the classroom because safe spaces allow students to take risks and explore concepts that they are unfamiliar with, whereas a perceived lack of safety in classrooms correlates with decreased student engagement. This kind of makes a lot of intuitive sense to me because, you know, if you put up your hand and someone laughs at you every time you get a question wrong or what you say doesn't really make sense, then you're just going to stop putting up your hand. Like, you don't want to seem like a fool in front of everyone unless you're exceptionally brave or don't care. So it's kind of the same concept in the friendship thing, where you have to kind of trust that you're not going to be judged and you're not going to be kind of thought of in a bad way for articulating an idea that may not necessarily be well thought through or may necessarily people might disagree with. So now that I've gotten that kind of holding environment idea defined, I'll move on to the second one, which is mirroring. So in psychotherapy, mirroring is a bit different to what Dr. Berzoff is using. So I'll just describe it and then I'll show you the difference. So in psychotherapy, mirroring is a tool to assist in intersubjective reasoning between the therapist and the patient. So what occurs is usually the therapist adopts, either consciously or unconsciously, the mannerisms of their patient. So if I was a patient, I speak quite casually and animatedly. So my therapist would, you know, kind of speak a bit more casually or enthusiastically with me. If I use my hands a bit more, she might also use her hands a bit more when she's speaking, versus someone who's a bit more reserved. It wouldn't be appropriate to engage with that person in the same way because it would come off as it just wouldn't gel. I'm trying hard to articulate it, but it's just, you wouldn't feel a sense of like empathy and understanding with that person because the way they're acting is contrary and making you uncomfortable, if that makes sense. I have an example of this actually. I don't know how many of people have watched like the Wednesday Netflix TV show, but in that she goes to see like this super happy therapist who's all like excited and totally is happy to have her as a patient. But, you know, Wednesday is kind of this like reserved, very shy character. So when the therapist acts like that with her, it just like, she totally shuts off to the idea of ever disclosing anything to this therapist. And she actually like escapes from the therapy room. So I think that's like a really extreme but pronounced way of kind of describing how mirroring is really important in developing the holding environment and then allowing for intersubjective reasoning in therapy. But the way Berzoff uses it is actually kind of different. So instead of just mirroring, just being copying or reflecting someone's mannerisms in a situation, it's the actual process of offering a different perspective on a situation, which then challenges and creates a deeper understanding of your perspective in the situation. So when you go chat to your friend about like what you heard someone say in class or something, you're both talking about the same situation, but through that conversation, you're developing a more critical understanding of the situation because you're considering the perspective of your friend and how you might respond to that perspective. So I'll get into that in just a second. So in Berzoff's study, the interviewee Wendy describes the mirroring process by comparing it to a camera. She says that, like a camera, a friend could tell me in a conversation that I may have said something that hurt the other person. A friend can tell me things that I may need to know. What is expressed by Wendy's statement seems to be the educative purpose of having a reflection or different perspective. When you see a photo of yourself or walk past a mirror and catch your reflection, you're seeing an externalized perspective of yourself. This is metaphorically what happens when you talk about a situation with a friend. They can offer advice based off their different perspective and knowledge of what happened. And we have another interviewee named Nancy who describes the process of mirroring as your friend giving you more insight into who and what you are. So I feel like that really ties back to the autonomy criteria on the psychotherapeutic model. It's through this process of communicating and intersubjective reasoning that people come to understand themselves a lot better. And of course, then understand the reasons and why they believe things and all that stuff. While Berzoff doesn't necessarily, not necessarily, while Berzoff doesn't explicitly link self-understanding and reasoning together, self-understanding is necessarily involved in reasoning. Like when Wendy said something hurtful, there were reasons for why she said that. Then when her friend told her it was a hurtful thing to say, the friend was motivated by reasons and a particular perspective as well. The friendship seems almost like a meeting place where these two individuals can come together and express and negotiate their different perspectives and come to a better understanding of a situation. So when two people can have a conversation from their individual perspectives, these different perspectives can help their reasoning, as I said, help them better understand themselves and help them better understand why someone might think differently from them, help them have more sense of empathy for different perspectives, because all of a sudden it becomes a lot more understandable and reasonable for someone to think differently than you if you actually understand where they're coming from, you know? So mirroring and intersubjective reasoning in friendship might occur when you and a friend discuss a movie you've seen. So this is just kind of an example from my life. So for instance, I saw the Barbie movie and I really liked it. But my friend Bree, we'll call her Bree, because I don't want to out her. We're chatting about it, and she actually really disliked the movie, which I was shocked by. So I told Bree, I was like, I really like this movie. I think it's a fun, kind of powerful feminist message, as much as it can be in like a big Hollywood blockbuster, right? But she thinks that the feminism doesn't actually go far enough and that it's just kind of packaged in advertisement for Barbie dolls that, you know, historically weren't the best representation of women and were made by, as they say in the movie, a board of men who just want women to buy their product. Like, it's not the most amazing feminist critique or analysis, right? For Bree and me to disclose our opinions of the movie to each other, we need to feel safe enough to articulate our true feelings on the movie. So we've got that holding environment there. If I said to Bree, oh, I really like the movie, and she was like, oh, no, you're stupid. Like, why would you like that movie? It's a dumb movie. Like, no one likes it. I would just be like, never show my true feelings again, because that would be such a kind of betrayal of my trust for her to respond like that. But instead she responds, oh yeah, I get what you're saying, but this is what I think. This is what I took from the film. So it's like being able to engage with someone and share your true feelings and have them respond kind of helps you with intersubjectivity in like two ways. So first, you're challenged to articulate in words and a digestible like argument about why you like something. So you're already doing that translating process that helps you understand your reasoning a bit better. And then when Bree responds, she's offering a new perspective of the movie by reflecting a different justified interpretation of the same experience. In other words, Bree mirrors back to a different perspective of the same scenario, which allows us to engage in intersubjective reasoning and in developing our own self-understanding. I thought I would, oh yeah, just wait, just give me 1 second. I missed this. So not only do I better understand why Bree doesn't like the movie, I'm also better understanding why I like the movie. And I'm able to develop a more critical understanding of the movie as a whole because I'm able to engage with more perspectives. So I thought I would give you an example of this more in the public reasoning, because it seems like, chats with friends about the Barbie movie isn't very political, isn't very about, social political structures or anything like that. So here's a better example situated within political conversations. So when I voted in the recent local election, I stood in line with my friend Anne, and we chatted the whole way. It was like a 30-minute wait to go vote. And we chatted about all the different policies we liked from all the different parties. So I really agreed with the Greens Party platform and expressed this to her. And she was like, oh yeah, like I see why you think that, but here's why I'm voting for Labour. And so while neither of us changed our minds about our vote, the process of articulating my perspective and having this perspective mirrored and challenged by Anne meant that I better understood my own justification for voting Greens, while also developing a better understanding of Anne's perspective and why someone might vote for Labour. This intersubjective reasoning happens because I felt, one, safe enough to express my political opinions to Anne, and also because she felt safe enough that she could mirror back her perspective on the situation and engage me in a conversation. So we've got that holding environment, allowing the conversation to take place genuinely with your true feelings. And then you've got the action of the process of mirroring, where you're getting multiple different perspectives reflected back to you about the same situation. And okay, and now I think it's Michael's turn to go back, and he will be talking about, you're talking about like the different roles of friendship and situating it more in the psychotherapeutic model. I'm going to let you.
This is the point where it gets a little bit crazier, and it's all just speculation and wildness that might show up later down the track. Oops. So what we've been saying, it's about reasons and social ontology. For reasons undisclosed, we've focused in on social roles as the key part of social ontology. What can we conclude from all this to wrap it together? So for most people, relationships, like in some of the literature, relationships will be treated kind of as a luxury or a bit of a, not the central thing, let's say. Others are going to say, well, obviously we need relationships. That was there in the, we don't really need the psychotherapist to tell us this. Relationships are a need. They're just so important to a well-lived life. I think this takes it a step further and says, it's not just that everyone's going to rationally see the importance of relationships. Relationships are a precondition for even doing this rationalizing. So they deserve a place in the conversation, not just because of some substantive argument that relationships are important, but just formally, because if we're talking about people who can think through what's actually important to them and whether society instantiates that, they're people who are talking with others, who can learn in concert with others. Most of the time, there may be some exceptions. Second thing, though, friendship is a strange sort of role. So friendship is a kind of social role, but it's a weird one. It's a purely voluntary one. So unlike other roles, like, being employed, we might be able to say society owes everyone a job. We can't really say society owes everyone a friend, just because that mixes up what a friend is. It's a voluntary relationship. It's a dynamic one and creative one, and these two sort of go together. And this is what Mira was just talking about. People sort of figure out in dialogue with each other what their relationship is, and it strengthens or weakens. They decide for themselves to some extent what the role actually is, whereas I, don't get that kind of say over my role as a lecturer or a citizen. I've got some wiggle room there, but we don't have that ability to form the role ourselves. So this is going to make it a kind of this is inconvenient, right? Because it turns out that it's really important, but it's also a sort of nuisance role that gets in the way of the others, and it doesn't behave like the others. So I've got a little bit of a theory of error here. I've already hinted at quite a bit of it, of why friendship has been neglected. So this is a book that was written by a couple of folks some of us know. They wrote it at UQ, though neither of them is around at the moment. Game of Mates, How Favours Bleed the Nation. So it's right there in the title that there's something wrong with friendship coming into politics. We don't want that in politics, get it out, kind of thing. Compare that to this quote from Aristotle on friendship. Indeed, those who hold wealth and office and power are thought to stand in special need of friends, for what is the use of such prosperity to them if they are denied the opportunity for beneficence, which is most commonly and most commendably directed towards friends? Or how can their prosperity be guarded and preserved without friends? So I think what we can see here is a kind of social progress where what Aristotle is talking about here, we would now call corruption. And it's still pretty prevalent, but at least we've come to agree that we don't, that it's a problem. This, I take it, this kind of process is part of what's purged the discussion of friendship from political philosophy, because it's seen as not having a place in politics, or its place in politics was extremely sus. We want to talk about the role of, policymakers, and we want to separate that from their role as friends to their mates. Something about what we're doing here is upsetting that, and I'm not sure where we go with this, but some kind of Pandora's box has been opened here. So those are the two that's the note that this paper, I think, would sort of end on. In terms of where to go next, this could end up being quite a big project. This is just some background or some external sort of things that need to be addressed at some point. Can we rely on what the psychotherapists are saying here? It's very different from the profession of the economists, who sort of present themselves as being quite sciencey. A lot of the psychotherapists are more sort of like what they're doing is a craft, and there's dispute within them. How evidence-based should this stuff be? Is it a science or is it a craft? Somehow I have to convince, political philosophers to listen to this stuff if it is indeed worth listening to, as I think it is. The conflict stuff, which we never even got to, how do they diagnose conflict and what can they say about resolving conflict? That question I've already raised of cognitive coherence. Clearly, some of the philosophers have a very, very different notion of this from the psychotherapists. Is there a kind of bridging account? The realistic limits of a person's engagement and relationship with the big society. So there's been some talk of the role of something like attachment theory in here. What do people sort of feel? Is there an analogous thing between not the individual and the individual, but the individual and society, a willingness to trust others in society or trust institutions or something like that? And with this, we get problems like people thinking that their relationship with the government is something that's unrealistic, thinking that Donald Trump is their personal friend or something like that, or wanting that personal friendship from a politician in the first place. I'd like to write something on the failure of Platonism as therapy. This is turning into quite a book that, how much of this actually happens. If anyone else wants to help me with some of these projects, shout out. Radical honesty. So there's some literature on resolving conflicts and making progress by just getting all the subterfuge and the implicit stuff out of our language, with just talking very directly and clearly about feelings and wants and goals and objectives, getting all of the implicit stuff out of there. The problem of how to divide the produce of society. This is the shrinking cake, or the cake metaphor, sorry, I get from Rawls and others in the kind of decision theory space. They're talking about cutting up a cake that is growing and rewarding bakers for making more cake. What do we do if the cake is shrinking in an ecological crisis? The economists aren't having, well, I don't think they can help us much there. Maybe they can. Maybe the psychotherapists have got something to say. Exit, Voice, and Suicide. It's named after a famous book, Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. There's talk of suicide being a peculiarly kind of first world problem. What does that say about our societies? That sort of all this good stuff, or what the economists call good stuff, all this choice and all this wealth, is increasing the rate of suicide. I don't think the economists can really answer that one. Maybe the psychotherapists can. Can these methods of mediation and conflict resolution be scaled up from the individual level to the wider society level? And neurodiversity in all this mix, which I think has already been sort of neglected and kind of visibly neglected in things like the book that I did my PhD thesis on. It popped its head up there, but it wasn't dealt with very well. And I think the psychotherapeutic model and the focus on things like roles makes that even more acute, even more visible. I think you had a...
Is it on? Yes. Okay, so Michael was talking about like possibilities for future projects based off of the psychotherapeutic model. So what other problems can we apply this to? And when I was thinking about like where to next, I was thinking, well, how can I take the research I was doing about friendship and intersubjective reasoning and use it to kind of critique social structures we already have in place? So I want to consider ways that we can scaffold social structures to support the development of friendship and good reasoning. This ties back into Michael's point where you can't just mandate that people be friends with each other, because then that defeats the whole purpose of being friends. Like, it's about voluntary relationships with people that you like. So you can't just be like, okay, you guys be friends and now you have good reasoning and this is democracy or whatever. Instead, it's about how can we support people in making friends and giving them opportunities to develop good friendships. So for the purposes of this presentation, I thought I would consider the problem of city planning. So recent studies demonstrate a correlation between urban planning that focuses a lot on if you look at the left-hand or right-hand picture for you, that focus on the suburban sprawl, which is kind of car-centric communities with not a lot of social spaces. You pretty much like go to work and go home or go to like the store. There's nowhere else to hang out with people besides those three areas. You see that as a growing problem in America, particularly. Michael highlighted the book. It's like the bowling alley. Bowling Alone, where these like third spaces or bowling alleys in America are slowly just becoming less of a thing. And so people are losing the ability to just kind of go hang out with a shared activity and meet friends, which then can hopefully develop into a more closer friendship where you can really challenge your beliefs and have like that better understanding of yourself that I was talking about. So the idea of urban planning that focuses on car-centric cities, lack of third spaces, lack of green spaces, and a correlation with reported feelings of disconnection and loneliness really gets me to think, like, I'm assuming that loneliness and disconnection means these people don't really have a lot of friends, don't really have a lot of opportunity to make friends, or if they have friends, they don't have opportunity to hang out with them. And if that's the case, and if friendship is an important thing for intersubjective reasoning, then surely one way we can kind of support that relationship and that mode of reasoning is to develop cities that support meeting different people and give opportunities to make friends with different people. So I'm thinking like community gardens, bars, libraries, skating rinks. In particular, I'm thinking I grew up in Calgary and there was something called a leisure center, which is something you guys don't have here. You just go, it was right across from my junior high. You just go, they have a swimming pool, they've got rock climbing, they've got after school activities. Anyone can go there. It's really cheap. It's like the gym, they've got cafes, childcare. It was like a hub of social activity, you know? I would go for swimming lessons. My mom would go chat with the other moms. Or, you know, I would go after school care where I would hang out with my friends and meet other people who I would never have met because, you know, they didn't go to my school. So it's hubs like these that are accessible to people that seem to be lacking in places that with reported feelings of disconnection and loneliness. And from my understanding of the friendship literature and kind of the psychotherapeutic model that Michael and I have been developing, it's the lack of these social spaces that also kind of injure or kind of have a negative impact on people's ability to reason well politically as well. That makes sense. Anyway, that's all I have. So thanks for listening. Michael, do you have anything else to say?
I think the only last thing was a thank you to the people who helped us, which is the next slide.
Okay, I'll let you do that one.
Oh, yeah, which was just to the people who talked to us, SEED and HBI, who funded the summer research project, which is great. Winifred Luis, who runs the Social Change Lab, and David Boniger, who is doing a sabbatical here from the US. Dennis O'Hara, who runs the Masters of Counseling, and Jim Shermer, who's got a bit of a philosophy background, a bit of virtue ethics background, and who works in that. They all were really generous with their time, so that was really cool. I was drawing on them. I didn't cite them, but I'm citing them now as some of the inspiration for that list. So this has ended up being quite a big talk. Sorry, went a little bit over time. We should maybe have a 5-minute break, and if people want to ask us any questions, we can go for it then. And I think there might be a social thing at St. Lucy's afterwards if anyone's keen, probably from 4, though we didn't book a table. Whoops.
We'll just make friends with some of the other people who do that.
Hey, Peter, good to see you there.
Oh, you're coming back. Okay, I'll see you in 5 minutes. I shut down.
Thanks for that, Michael.
You've got your mic, Ruben.
Yeah, I found my mic. Yeah, thanks for the talk. Good stuff. I'm gonna have to take off now though. I've got a tutorial to go to. But yeah, good job.
Talk soon, I hope. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, appreciate it.